Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Denise, and I'm going to be supporting the webinar today. Today's webinar is on the Society collection, Digimap's Society collection in an overview. Our presenter will be James Reed, Deputy Director and Head of Services at EDINA. This webinar will be recorded and will be available on YouTube in a few days' time. So we will also add to our website, and please take a look. And we will also have a few minutes after the webinar for questions and answers. But Emma is here and she will be supporting us during the webinar. So if you have any questions that are pressing, you feel free to add them to the chat, and she will be answering them as they come. I will leave you with James Reed now, and enjoy your webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share screen. So bear with me a second while I get that up. Okay, so a little bit about me. My name is James Reed. I'm head of services at DINA, but I'm also part of the senior leadership group at the UK Data Service, which is based at the University of Essex. I've been a long-time user of Census, and I've been involved in the delivery and support for census-related products to the academic community for the last 25 years. So I thought I'd start fundamentally. Society Digimap is predominantly access to census data in a graphical form. And I thought I'd start with a kind of fairly straightforward question. What is the census? Should say up front, when we talk about the census, it sounds as if there's only one. There are actually, in fact, 3 censuses taken every 10 years. That's one for Scotland, one for Northern Ireland, and one that covers both England and Wales. Most people think of the English and Welsh one as the census, but it's just worth bearing in mind that Scotland and Northern Ireland have their own censuses. So the census is basically a comprehensive count of people and households across the UK. It's conducted every 10 years and has been since 1801, with minor interruption during the Second World War, and a slight disruption in more recent times under COVID, which led to the delay of the Scottish census by a year. And the census ultimately provides the vital insights into population, housing, education, and more. So it drives central and local planning. So if you ever think about how you predict school roles, where to locate pharmacies and hospitals, all of these require information about the population, or at least a baseline, and that's what the census is aimed to provide. A little history of the census. Early population counts in the UK stem from taxation and administrative need rather than any specific desire for scientific measurement. It was largely about governance, military planning, and resource allocation. This is back in the sort of 1800s and forward. The first official UK census was conducted in 1801, has been around, as I say, every 10 years since, with minor interruptions. The 1841 is probably considered by most the first modern census, which included people's names, age, and any other details. The socio-demographic detail we kind of today would recognize as the census. So why have a census at all is probably a sensible question to ask. Well, it provides a comprehensive population coverage and at detailed geographic level. The census is underpinned by legislation, so it actually requires an act of parliament that mandates participation and protects the confidentiality of those enumerated. This legal framework also ensures that it gets higher response rates than most other surveys. And there is essentially it's against the law not to fill in your census form. And if census data has been protected by legislation, and the detail that you provide on that is protected for 100 years. So even your kind of forebears who fill in the census details, it's only after 100 years that can be released. Census data, as I've kind of already alluded to, is essential for authorities, local authorities, central government, and critically for academic researchers. It supports its main purpose is to derive public policy and support the delivery of public policy. So every local authority will use the census, be it at supporting their local MPs and their kind of ward constituencies, or whether it's actually the services that underpin a specific part of the UK. Technological advances, obviously, over that period have been quite rapid. In the last 30 years, there have been significant changes, and we've moved increasingly towards more online census data collection. But the census also has a bit of a weakness. It's only conducted every 10 years, so in the intercensual period, a lot can change. And the closer you get to, or the further away you get from the last census, the more unreliable the estimates or the actual figures that are collected are reliable. It's actually a very expensive operation, and annually or decennially, governments have reflected on whether they wish to keep up that investment. For the last three censuses, there's been rumor that this census will be the last census. That hasn't quite translated as yet, but there are moves afoot to try and make what's known as the administrative census, where we use administrative data from other sources rather than collect a big survey. While it's coordinated at the UK level, census design is also delivered differently across England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. So there are regional subtleties, not just in terms of how it's delivered, but in terms of the question sets that are asked. A lot of information and time is spent, and this is currently ongoing with ONS in England, and also with NISRA and in Northern Ireland and NRS in Scotland, in terms of consultation, what sorts of things the census should cover. So as an academic, now is the time to voice your concerns if there's things that you think aren't in the census that should be included. The most recent census was conducted in 2021, which many of you may well remember because you probably filled it in. 2022 in Scotland, because it was delayed due to COVID. It did take place during the pandemic with lockdowns and ability restrictions, which had some consequences upon the enumeration. It did adopt a digital first approach, so paper questionnaires remained available for those who were unable or unwilling to respond online. So physical hard copy forms were still available. Response rates were high, as they traditionally have been, 97% in England and Wales, slightly lower in Scotland. And there's contested reasons as to why that might have been in Scotland. Possibly having that extra year's delay didn't help. There is also a post-census survey that tries to fill in and quality assure the census counts that are arrived at after census. The thing to remember also about the census is that this is not instant. While census day happens on a particular year, the outputs and the products that are derived from the census, i.e. asking people questions, they take several years in some cases to actually transpire into products. For those of you who paying attention, you'll see there's been a whole slew of releases in the last 2 years at increasingly more granular geographic level and detail. Some of that data, those data sets will still be coming at a future point. I should pause there and say the census, when we think of the census, it's actually a range of products that are derived from taking that survey. So that classically you have the enumeration counts, which are the statistics that are available at various geographic levels. But also you have things called a sample of anonymized records, which are the individual counts, which researchers can, under restricted access, get access to. So these are actual named individuals that the actual record returns are mostly available for. Those are samples. Also, we have geographic products. The range of geographic products that we deliver has changed over the decades, and we'll come to why that matters slightly later. And there's also some which is interaction and mobility data. So if you're interested in migration and mobility and looking at who went where from where, the census helps with that. So there's a whole slew of different products that the census encompasses, not just the aggregate statistics, which predominantly, and it's the univariate statistics that Society Digimap focuses on. This year's, the most recent census introduced some new questions. Every census is an opportunity for researchers and academics, and also the administration, to ask things that are particularly pertinent about society at that particular point in time. So veteran status has always been a kind of long run ambition to have added to the census. That was done this time. Sexual orientation made its appearance for the first time, to a degree of contention. The gender identity issue was slightly contentious, the second of the questions there. And also we had some introduction of new questions related to passports. That was actually introduced new in Scotland, but it was previously asked in England, Wales, of the 2011 census. So the census covers a broad range of socio-demographics, population characteristics and identity, education and labour market details, health and housing, ethnic group, national identity, language, religion, mobility, migration, and that armed forces background. So they all provide the kind of detail that really generates the statistics that the census provides. So coming to what Society Digimap offers, it offers those aggregate statistics that we talked about at various geographical levels. Society Digimap is a web map for exploring those social and census-derived statistics by area. You can choose an indicator, an overlay, you can choose a year, and you can view the map. So we've kind of pre-built those views of the underlying statistics to make life easy for people who just want to generate a map or see the relative variable to the area of interest. Census geography has and always is a complex geographical piece. They tend to be nested. So the smallest area for the current census is something called an output area. Those output areas are then aggregated up into something called lower super output areas, which are then aggregated upwards into a local authority levels. So there are a range of statistics that are available at various geographical levels. The detail is always a balance with the census in terms of trying to safeguard confidentiality of individuals, because it's a precept of the census that no individual should be able to be identified via the census. And the census agencies themselves are great pains to make sure that doesn't happen by something called secure disclosure control. So there's a bit of statistical jury pokery that goes on to make sure that individuals aren't seen, to make sure that numbers are released at significantly high level, that it's impossible for anyone, even if they're trying to backward engineer the census outputs to identify individuals. We've touched on this sort of already. Why does the census matter? I mean, who cares? Well, aside from your kind of legal obligation to partake in the census, it is and remains the most comprehensive source of who lives where at a very small level. It's that small area detail down to neighborhood level. We're talking collections of postcodes in most cases. That's useful for profiling, for planning and baseline comparisons. It's not real time. As I said, there's always a delay between census enumeration day and the outputs, but it's best for describing patterns rather than proving causality. And I'll say a little more on that in a second. So census data here within the context of Society Digimap typically provides published aggregate outputs, not the individual record level. If you're interested interested in things like the sample of anonymized records or flow data, it's sometimes known as interaction data. That's the who, when, where, from where. Those are available through other services that are not operated by Adena, but are formed part of the UK data service. Indicators are tied to standard geographies, and most geographies have names. The smaller and most specific geographies don't. They have codes. And measures may appear as counts, rates, or percentages, so it's always useful to check the definitions and denominators. Hopefully this will be relatively familiar. If you're a Digimap user, it follows the sort of classic Digimap interface design. And you can see here where we've got kind of the search parameters to locate your place. The overlay panel basically is where you select your year, your category, and the statistic you're interest. So as I said previously, what we've done is pre-built based off that census data, a lot of statistical variables that you can then map. You can play as usual with the transparency slider. You can see the legend breaks that we've pre-built. You can click on the map to return simply the statistics as illustrated in the screenshot. They're the statistics for one particular area. And more importantly, if you want to download a range of areas at different geography levels, you can do that through the download button. Standard kind of Digimap download shopping basket will allow you to pick whether you want all the geographies in one file or individual in separate files. If you do choose to download the data, what you'll get is a rather exciting CSV file like is pictured here. So basically that is the raw data for the various census variables that we provide access to. As I say, they come in different geographical levels, and you can then use those in your onward processing. So if you're interested in doing some data manipulation in R or Python or in Excel, that raw data is available to do that. Area codes are very useful. Names are less for joining. You find there's a lot of places that are called very similar things. Particularly when you start handling Welsh and Scottish place names, it's very fragile to try and join data back on names. So always use the code if you can. What census is useful for, again, are things like creating area profiles. So ONS and the other census agencies themselves provide area profiles, which are snapshot picture profiles of small areas, so councils, neighborhoods, or service catchments. You can create your custom ones with the data that you can get access to from the census. You can look at inequality and look at access to specific things like GP surgeries, estimate service versus need indicators. You can look at the housing and educational labor market pattern mapping. Again, we provide some by default in Digimap, but you can dig deeper. And it's also useful as a quick data set for teaching for workshops and assignments. And again, the thing to stress with Digimap, Society Digimap, is these are univariate statistics. They're not what are known as multivariate. So we don't aggregate the data by another variable. Basically, these are just simple single variables. Very useful in their own right, but for some of the deeper analysis, you may want to look at the multivariate tables, which again are available through a range of outlets, including the UK data service. So just coming back to that kind of mapping, I hinted earlier that you look at counts and counts indicate volume, so large populated areas dominate. So if you look at any of the Society Digimap maps, the large areas tend to stand out. You can do some kind of normalization by using percentages, which is what we've done. But you also need to pay attention to the denominator that you're looking at. If you're looking at residents as people or households and population counts. there are a range of kind of common pitfalls. There's ways to avoid them. It's not always easy to avoid them completely. One of the significant features of the UK census is that boundaries change over time. So the geographies between the census have been tried to be held stable for about the last 30 years or so. Prior to that, they were created as convenience mechanisms for the purposes of the enumerating the census, where somebody physically had to hand out the forms. So the boundaries themselves that are captured have been problematic in as much that they change over time. So if you look at a small area that persists across time, you look at the boundaries and you think, well, actually, that there's multiple boundary changes that have occurred here. So the geographies may not match across all years. As I say, in the last 30 years, the census agencies have tried to be more uh, diligent in terms of making those change over time much more amenable. But if you are doing change over time, just be aware that boundary changes are a major problem. The other thing that changes across time is the categories and the questions. And as I said before, that's because the census flexes with whatever is current and relevant to society at that particular point. So the census can change. Those categories are all not directly comparable across time and also necessarily across space, because the categorizations can subtly change between the question may be similar, but the definition of it, the exact definition of it, may slightly differ between the three national censuses. Small numbers and disclosure control, I've already said that the agencies make big efforts to make sure that small numbers are not a problem, because there's a risk of disclosure control. So they do apply suppression and rounding techniques that can affect the detail. And again, those methodologies have changed over time. So the mechanisms for ensuring that the census is non-disclosive, it also needs to be taken account if you're looking at the census across time. Classically, ecological fallacy, area averages are not individual attributes, so you cannot infer that a global trait is specific to any particular individual. And the last common pitfall, something called a modifiable aerial unit problem, which relates to the boundary changes piece above. Results can change with geography. So it famously, a piece of academic work by Professor Stan Openshaw illustrated that you can prove a relationship either plus or minus between two variables depending on how you carve the space up. So that modifiable area unit problem is a significant thing that most researchers and methodologists have to wrestle with. There are ranges of approaches to deal with that. Don't have time to go into those now, but the takeaway message is a naive analysis can lead to a incorrect conclusion simply based on how the space is carved up. A few other things to think about when you're thinking about using census data is to respect the licensing, not just Digimap and Adina's, but third-party license terms. Don't distribute restricted extracts, cite source, year, geography, the indicator used, and be careful with sensitive topics at small areas. So it's quite easy, particularly for area profiling, to stigmatize areas by labeling them inappropriately. So these are minor things to think about, but they're significant in terms of any academic outputs.